Before I start, is there anybody that is not ready? Okay, for a quick off-time roadmap, I'm just going to be doing a quick round summary. I'm going to be answering one of the concerns that my opponent had in his last speech, and then I'm going to move on to a couple of the arguments that we had brought up in our first negative constructive speech. Okay. Starting time now. The first thing that I want to go on to, and I just want to get this out of the way really fast so it doesn't become an issue later in the round, is our evidence on whether or not the push for peace is going to be resulting in conflict. That was not dated in 2007, that was dated in 2017. I just want to clarify that super fast. I want to move on to the first advantage that they had brought up throughout this round, which is going to be their innocence advantage. So in terms of innocence, we read cards previously stating that the judicial system was doing what they could in order to avoid innocent people being wrongly convicted. And we even had a statistic claiming that over 130 people were taking off of death row in order to avoid a wrongful conviction. So when they claim that the judicial system is not doing what they can in order to protect these people, if anything, they are taking the extra steps and measures to avoid that they are not wrongfully killing innocent people. Regardless, we stated previously with multiple cards that the government has to do what they can in order to protect the majority. And we mentioned that for every one person that is killed on death row and has been given the death sentence, 17 lives are saved. So in terms of whether or not we are upholding classical republicanism and the majority and the innocent civilians, we most absolutely are. Next thing that I want to move on to is I want to move on to human rights and the power that we have across the rest of the world. We've asked continuously how we are going to be able to uphold these human rights and possibly change the opinions of other countries that frequently abuse these human rights. And we couldn't be given a direct example of any time in history. As a matter of fact, as of now in China, just speaking out your personal opinion about the government is enough to get you executed, whereas in the United States, you can speak freely on it. Not to mention in Saudi Arabia, being gay can get you crucified, whereas in the United States, we legalized gay marriage. You can see just because of values that we uphold in the United States, that doesn't necessarily mean that other countries are going to be following suit. And to determine that by eliminating the death penalty on a federal level is going to solve for all the other countries' world problems in the sense that they are wrongfully convicting people or executing people, regardless of how just it is, that's not true, and we can't assume that our policies are going to support that. One thing that they actually dropped is they dropped our main argument for how we were going to be attacking soft power, which is why we mentioned that Donald Trump, as a matter of fact, is affecting our soft power position by making a lot of decisions that, if anything, are making the United States seem like we're cowards or we're just going to pull out of deals. I read evidence on that previously. I can read it again if needed. But essentially what that evidence was saying is that as we continue to progress and as we continue to make big decisions in the United States economy, if anything, that makes the economy less reliable, making the death penalty the last of the worries that we have in terms of soft power and the theory of hegemony. Death penalty is the last thing we have to worry about when it comes to upholding our sense of power that we have across the world. The other thing that I want to go on to is some of their impacts, because they have impacts like terrorism, nuclear terrorism, global warming, and those are big impacts. But all their impacts and solving these impacts is all under the assumption that the United States has influence, because how they plan on solving for these impacts is by collaborating with other countries, meaning that the United States has to have influence in order to maintain the peace across the world. We read evidence previously claiming that forcing that peace and pushing it onto other countries is going to result in conflict. So if anything, their link their turns, and not to mention, they have yet to prove how their plan was going to 100% effectively push for this peace, and other countries changing the humanitarian stances in terms of the death penalty and execution. So until they can prove that, they do not have the solvency in terms of solving for global warming or solving for human rights abuses and terrorism, meaning that that is the only burden of the NIG, is to prove that, as a matter of fact, the US does not have any influence. The next thing I want to go on to is I want to read another card in terms of their nuclear terror card, or in this case, a terrorism and a nuclear war. No risk of nuclear terrorism. Time, planning, resources, and expertise prevents. Waste 2015. Nuclear weapons extension to terrorism has been a vehicle for fear-mongering that is unjustified by available data. The debate on nuclear terrorism tends to distract from events that raise the risk of nuclear war. The acquisition of nuclear weapons by terrorists requires significant time, planning, resources, and expertise, with no guarantee that an acquired device would work. It requires consideration of the threat. Consider the three possibilities. Okay. Time stops then. For these reasons and many more, I urge a strong vote on the side of the negation.
Okay, just to clarify, Sophia cut out. We're just going to roll with it for the sake of not having to do this again. Cool.
Okay.
Paige, do you want to take any? Do you feel like you need to take any prep time?
No, I don't need to take any prep time.
All right. When you have your timer ready, just go for it.
Can someone actually time me, because my phone is dead?
Jack, can you do it, or do you want me?
I can't because the timing app on my
All
computer
right,
is.
let me put 5 minutes on the clock. I'll start it when you start talking.
Okay. I'll begin now. Okay, so first I'm going to be, oh wait, sorry, I'm not beginning now. First I'm going to give an off-time roadmap. I'm just going to be reaffirming what we said and then addressing what our opponent said. Now I will begin. So first we need to focus on what is going on right now. 4 in 100 people killed by the death penalty are innocent. So this is happening right now. This is not just made up. This is a problem that is going on right now. And even though our opponents said that the death penalty isn't as big as an issue, it causes more things down the line that I will get to in a second. And this conflict is not just a conflict that is centralized here in America. It is a much larger scale conflict because it's affecting it's a global conflict. It's affecting countries around the world. And this is because we aren't maintaining this zero tolerance when it comes to the death penalty. Therefore, we are setting this example for other countries that killing innocent people is okay. And this is absolutely not okay. So first, I wanted to address what my opponent said about America not being influential and affecting other countries. America is respected around the world for its peace and its prosperity. So we are a role model for other countries. Like they said, Saudi Arabia, with the lynching with the gay people, and China, we are right now being a role model for them because of this peace and prosperity, other than the death penalty. So this is how we are impacting these countries. And not only that, but Saudi Arabia, we can't expect them to change overnight. These are ideals that have been in their have long existed in their country, and so we must focus on these other countries that we are impacting, and we must take a more progressive outlook on that. And so not only that, but respecting human rights is an international law. And when we're not respecting this international law, we are creating more tension between us and other countries. And this tension causes a plethora of other conflicts. One being that we are not able to cooperate on extremely important issues such as global warming and terrorism. That brings in how the death penalty, while they said it may not exist in such a great quantity, it still has crazy, like, lasting impacts such as global warming and terrorism. And not only that, but this tension creates tension between powers with nuclear weapons. And this causes the potential for a nuclear war to happen, which could essentially wipe out our entire population and be extremely detrimental to our to the human race itself. And this probability is at an extremely all-time high because of this, because we are not obeying these international laws. We are causing tension to arise between countries with an insane amount of power. And then I would also like to address what my opponent said about life in prison being worse than the death penalty. This actually reaffirms what we are saying, because life in prison being worse than the death penalty makes it much more of a humane deterrent than actually killing people. So this life in prison is therefore causing less human lives to be lost because more people are being deterred by what they said, it being extremely much worse to live in a concrete, to be living in a concrete basement, which causes more people to be deterred from this like extreme issue. So for all these reasons and more, I urge you to vote.
Okay. Do you need any prep time?
Sorry, I was furiously typing. No, I'm good on prep. Everyone can hear me? So, okay, real quick. I'm just going to be extending our disadvantage and then reading a couple cards that I didn't get to in my last speech. And then I'm just going to be basically summarizing the round. You know, what's going on. That's my off-time roadmap. Real quick, let me try and use my timer.
If you can't, I can just start the timer again.
Okay, oh, I got it. Okay.
All right.
Is everybody muted? All right. I will begin. Elections DA link. Even if the public does not hear about decisions, elites will, and they will highlight those issues to the public. Rosenberg 09. Social scientists have studied the mechanism by which the public learns about Supreme Court opinions. Controversial decisions are likely to vanish quickly from the media. However, they do emphasize that elite action can change this pattern. When the Supreme Court decisions provoke sustained elite reaction, the media covers those reactions. The nature of court decisions' effects on public opinion is usually a product of the way elites react to the decision. Moving on to death sentences are rapidly declining now. Garrett 17. Death sentences in the modern era in the United States have become increasingly concentrated in a small number of counties. Death sentencing is retreating into its bastions as the less frequent users have abandoned the practice altogether. Death sentencing often even in the bastions has declined. There's a growing anti-death penalty movement in the United States. Barry 19. The U.S. tradition of punishing those convicted of murder with death has gradually deteriorated, revealing an emerging awareness that the right to life ought to be taken away through application of the death penalty. I'm going to cut the card there. Basically, what it's saying that taking away the death penalty paired with the death penalty giving people advantages in appealing their case, and the fact that it's being used a lot less kind of go against it being abolished. The number of executions has steadily declined. This is Barry 19. The number of executions nationwide has steadily declined from a height of nearly 100 executions in 1999 and 20 in 2016, the lowest number since 1991. So I'm going to be moving on to talking about my opponent's international human rights. So international laws get violated all the time. The system is broken. This is worth 17. Many norms of international law, especially international human rights law, are widely violated. International human rights law has become more expansive and looser so as to bring more human rights norms into the ambit of international law, despite widespread non-compliance with those norms. Today, international law includes a broad range of human rights norms, which are routinely violated, from the UN reporting requirements to gross violations of human dignity. Widespread violations of some legal norms make it harder to enforce. A baseline reputation of non-compliance among states generally harms interstate cooperation because it means that the states will have to do more in a treaty agreement to generate trustworthy commitments. So basically what that's saying is that the international human rights laws are violated constantly. And moving on to what my opponents are talking about with the international human rights laws. So they're basically trying to say that if we change our stance on the death sentence, other places will change their stance as well. Well, my opponents are the main thing that me and my partner have brought up is Saudi Arabia and how they're extremely radical with their appliance of equality and things like that. And my opponent said, oh, well, Saudi Arabia isn't likely to change, but we're not trying to change the UK's policy because the UK's policy is somewhat moderate and viewed as more humane currently. We are trying to change the radical countries that often use the death sentence or are extremely politically obliged to one side. We aren't looking to change the UK's policy because their policy is somewhat okay. We're looking to change radical countries like Saudi Arabia, and not solving for that negates the advantage and getting rid of while also getting rid of the protections for those on death row. As we mentioned before, we brought it up many times that people on death row are given many advantages in their court cases. So as well as this, my opponents admitted that life in prison is worse. They had literally flat out said that life in prison is worse and that it is more humane. However, this goes against everything because if it's worse, it is less humane. To live a life of solitude in a very violent place is most likely worse than dying. So this somewhat flows to our side because in our opponents admitting this, they basically endorse our side of this and show that it is worse to abolish the death penalty because it would be more cruel and unusual. So going on to my round summary, international human rights. Other countries won't follow the US. It will only be a fake gesture that damages inmates in the long run. If we take away the death penalty, inmates that are on death row will be taken away those advantages, and more people that are innocent will be more likely to die. More people that are innocent on death row will die, and more people on death row that are not innocent still will die. So doing this, A, won't change anything, and B, will cause more death and destruction. Moving on to soft power. My opponents dropped this early in the round, so this should not be weighed within the round. However, we did talk about how soft power in the Trump administration has kind of tarnished the US's reputation, and in this, other countries are less likely to follow the United States. So, and talking about innocence, faith in the judiciary, and the fact that many have been exonerated. So the judiciary is doing the best job possible to exonerate as many innocent people. So we need to put faith in the judiciary to do their job and allow the death sentence to do its work, as well as saving people from life in prison and giving those advantages to other people. Moving on to the DA, my opponents did not attack the DA for these reasons and many more. I urge a strong vote on the side of negation. All right, last speech.
Great. Well, I'm going to be taking 5 minutes of prep time. Actually, hang on, check. How long do we have left in the round? Like for a Zoom? Yeah.
We don't have the 10-minute warning yet, so I suggest you just please do it, because if
All right,
yeah,
all right.
let's get this thing done.
I'm gonna be starting my prep time now. Okay, I'm gonna be stopping my prep time. So All right, this is final speech. This is the 2NC. I'm going to be starting my 5 minutes now. So my opponents brought up that death sentencings are lower, but that would still mean that it's still active, meaning that some portion of the people still killed and sentenced to death in federal courts are still innocent. And because of that, it means that there's an amount of innocent people that are being killed. And that's why we need to abolish it. One innocent death is way too much for it to still be enacted and upheld within the country. They're also talking about international human rights laws are broken often, and they don't have any reprimanding forces behind them or anything to keep them in check. That's why it's key that the U.S. needs to ban the death penalty so that we can, so that the U.S. can be that example and step in and set a precedent for why human rights globally are so important. Like my partner, or maybe I read a card talking about how us banning the death penalty would lead to a more global connection and cooperation, not only with problems that we're facing today globally, but also societally, as in human rights, women and child trafficking, very negatives of society and the things people don't like to talk about but are still an issue, is something that would further be along the lines of effects caused by banning the death penalty. So the Supreme Court, my opponents also talked about how the Supreme Court and U.S. sway has diminished globally over the years. And that's why it's also key to ban death penalty, like I said, and to reestablish the U.S. as a key country enforcing human rights, anti-trafficking, because these are very important problems nationwide and globally as well. We don't have any key faces for these movements. It's all just right now small scale, but if we start making the path towards banning the death penalty, then we establish that the US stands for human rights and that other countries would follow suit, leads to more cooperation and leads to more global knowledge and watchfulness for these very negative things. So my opponents also like to bring up Saudi Arabia a lot and how they haven't changed a lot, even though I personally brought up an example about how they have passed laws making it okay for women to attend soccer games, which when you think about the broad scope and history of Saudi Arabia, that is huge. That's one of the most progressive ideas and laws they passed in the last 100 years. And you could argue it largely is because of the U.S. interaction with them. In these 100 years, the U.S. didn't have much of a playing force within it, but since we established good connections with them, they started to have more progressive ideas, not only governmentally but society as well. We can't expect them to change overnight, but we can start putting in these seeds of thoughts about equalism, things along those lines, social progression within the minds of the people rather than the government. So life in prison is a humane alternative to the death penalty in that there are no guarantees for death. No one is certain about what happens after it. And in some cases, these death penalties and how they're administered with lethal injection are actually botched, and it leads to hours of suffering and agony for the accused, which is not humane at all. In fact, there's a shortage of doctors in the country who are specially trained to administer. So prisons would use normal guards, and it would end up causing agonizing death. However, life in prison would give them a chance for the innocent to present a case and have an appeal to get out of that. And finally, the example that the U.S. sets is seen worldwide by governments and their people alike. It is not it's not the goal to coerce these regime governments into changing overnight their ideals and how they operate societally and economically as well, but it's for the people to realize the errors of their society and to demand change. It's so important that the U.S. be an example, a pillar of strength in these fields, such as human trafficking and human rights violations, because when we set an example, it leads to other societies and their peoples looking at it and saying, this is better than what we have now. And because of that, we should change it. We've seen examples like this, like I said, with Saudi Arabia passing women being able to attend soccer games, but we can also see it actively in a more physical sense with Hong Kong protests. Hong Kong has largely been influenced by Western culture, and the communist China government does not like that. However, Hong Kong sees the U.S. as a key pillar to democracy and to the civil rights, life, liberty, and happiness. That's what we stand for, and so that is why we need to ban death penalty in order to establish this. And for these reasons and many more, I stand on the side of affirmation. Thank you.
Oh, it is over.
Can you stop
Luken-
recording?
Yeah. Oh, shoot. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.